Good afternoon, everybody. On behalf of the entire Department of Design, IIT Hyderabad, I welcome Dr. Shilpa Das. She is the head of NID PhD Research Program and is the senior faculty of Interdisciplinary Design Studies at NID Ahmadabad. She has a cumulative teaching experience of 25 years and has also worked in the NGO and publishing sectors. She is on the board of advisors of the Bill and Mel India Gates Foundation for Human-Centered Design in Public Good, Seattle, USA, 2018. Dr. Das is the editor and author of 50 Years of National Institute of Design, 1961 to 2011, Ahmedabad, NID 2013, and of Indian Crafts in a Globalizing World, Ahmedabad, NID 2017. Her research areas are storytelling, traditions, craft documentations, semiotics, disability studies, universal design, accessibility, and aesthetics. Please welcome Dr. Shilpa Das, who's here with us to talk about design with disability. All over to you, ma'am.
So today we have a very special person with us. She is special to me in more than one way. When I was a student at NID, learning the very basics of design as an undergrad student, I was introduced to a new subject, something new but integral to the very concept of design. It was science and liberal arts that taught me design is not an isolated subject, but an amalgamation of many things. I was very much attracted to my teacher due to her personality, strong yet simple and determined, committed, and most importantly, down to earth and always approachable. Today, it is our privilege to have Dr. Shilpa Das with us. We are really fortunate to have you today.
Thank you, Meenakshi, and thank you, Ankita, for that very generous introduction. Then, if I also were to start talking about you, we will form a mutual admiration society. Anyway, hi, everyone, and thanks for the invitation to the Department of Design, IIT Hyderabad. It's good to see, as I said, Ankita, familiar face, and let's then just jump into the deep end and begin. So let me now share my can you all see?
Yes.
Can you see the slides?
Yeah, we can.
Yeah, so this students, this is not really a very sexy kind of topic because usually, when we offer electives to our students and we offer something like queer studies and we offer disability studies, which one is going to be signed up for. So basically in this session, I'm going to be talking about a very basic introduction to the fields of disability and design for disability. Now, whenever I speak about disability, people always ask me which are the correct terms to use because there is a great deal of confusion about that. And terms such as differently abled, specially abled, physically challenged, mentally challenged, special, handicapped, all of these are actually unacceptable to disabled people for a variety of reasons. So I shall not use these in this presentation. The term people with disabilities is usually preferable because it asserts the value of the person first and the disability becomes secondary. But people with disabilities themselves will always prefer the term disabled people instead of people with disabilities, and they use it in a political way. So people often say that the term disabled people is like affixing a label, but you cannot talk about the person and the disability separately. So disability is an essential part of your selfhood and identity. And this is also in line with the social model of disability that I shall speak about a little later, that says that people with impairments are disabled by society. Okay. Now, Before we start the presentation, I also wanted to bring to your notice a term that has been coined recently, that is in use a great deal, and which is Divyang, right? All of you must have heard the term Divyang being used since 2016. And basically, Divyang means divine body, with the government of India propagating it. So earlier, persons with disabilities was the accepted official term. But with Divyang, what happens is that religion is used to give a positive slope to disability, normalizing it as a God-given condition, as something therefore to be accepted with everything that comes along with it. And this is much like the term Harijan or children of God used by Gandhi euphemistically to mainstream the lowest castes and thereby making oppressive values and systems acceptable. So in a recent book published last year, the authors GJV Prasad and Someshwar Sati talk about this extensively. And this term takes the focus away from what is called the rights-based approach to disability. And understandably, disabled people have hugely resisted this term. So can anyone tell me what this image is on the slide? What is this object?
A modified or advanced wheelchair.
Okay. Okay.
Uplifted and then used for walking. I think I read it somewhere in
Okay.
Universal Principles.
This is actually a wheelchair. All of you are right. This is a wheelchair, but it is used for climbing stairs. Okay. So anyway, that's just some trivia. So let's start with facts and figures like these. The WHO says that disabled people are the world's largest minority. And this figure is increasing through population growth, medical advances, and the aging process. Let's also look at some operational definitions of disability at the outset. Now, see, definitions are important because the action that is taken and even social policies that are framed are made on the basis of these. For instance, if you look at disability as a personal tragedy, you will see disabled people as victims of tragic circumstances. And social policies will aim at compensating them. But if you see disability as a social oppression, then you will see disabled people as collective victims of an uncaring society. And so social policies will aim at removing the oppression. So definitions does influence who people think and feel they are or ever can be. We have a number of diverse definitions of disability that are influenced by different socio-cultural historical determinants and are often controversial. So what do we mean by disabled people? Now, in Europe, for example, it might mean people with all the disabilities that are mentioned on this slide. But as per Indian law, these 21 bodily conditions to your left are termed disabilities. Earlier, with the earlier law of 1995, only 7 bodily conditions were considered disabilities. So, but within the Indian legislative framework, you know that state constituted boards give a percentage of disability, and you need a minimum of 40% to be defined as disabled. So let us look at these terms because we are often confused about their use and they are often used interchangeably. But there is a difference in their use. So in the context of health experience, this is how the WHO differentiated among the three. You know, an impairment, if you look at the diagram at the bottom, then impairment can be caused by disease or accident. And because of that, there may be a certain bodily limitation of some sort, which along with restrictions that are imposed by the environment lead to a situation of handicap. But this WHO definition and other similar ones were not received well, particularly among disabled people and their organizations, because they were seen as ableist, based upon able-bodied assumptions of disability, and as not correlating to the lived experiences of disabled people. So such definitions medicalize and individualize both the problems of disability and policy making. Now with that, we look at, yeah, so when you look at Western history, for example, down Western history, right from Aristotle's Politics in 350 BC to the Roman Empire's conceptualizing disabled people as monsters, to Charles Darwin and the eugenics theory, which talks about the survival of the fittest in 1859, to Hitler, who exterminated 3 million disabled people in concentration camps in Nazi Germany, have all been oppressive of disabled people. Now, as a result of such dissatisfaction, in 1976, a bunch of people got together in UK. And in their manifesto document, they redefined the WHO definitions of impairment and disability. So, according to them, yes, an impairment, they said, is a permanent or a transitory psychological, physiological, or anatomical loss of structure or function. For example, it could be paralysis after polio or an amputated limb, impaired hearing and so on. But disability, they said, is the restriction of activity that is caused because your contemporary social organization does not take account of, or takes very little account of, people who have physical impairments and excludes them from the mainstream of social activities. So the WHO then quickly revised its earlier classification in 2001 due to such critiques. And this new classification was hailed as a landmark change in terms of how health and disability came to be seen as socially constructed. And this considered two contextual factors as having a bearing on a person's health. Environmental factors like physical, which could be physical, social, cultural, or institutional in nature, and personal factors like gender, age, education, and lifestyle. And both these factors affect other components of disease or disorder, and together establish the link between disabled people and their interaction with the social environment. So if we put aside those definitions, it might be rewarding to see how disabled people themselves look at disability and themselves. So they look at disability as social oppression, as involving the struggle for choice, empowerment, rights, social justice, and participation. And as a result, the disability perspective moved towards a rights-based one. So when we look at how Indian society perceives disability, we find that it is a product of a philosophy of life that has been shaped over millennia. And as we all know, a deep-rooted part of the Indian psyche across religions in India is the moral law of karma, the law of action and reaction, the predetermined effect of your past actions in an earlier life, almost attributable to the punishment for the sins of your past births. And also, we have all grown up listening to the Ramayana and the Mahabharata and other mythological and folk stories and folk stories, where we have seen that disability is only a visual difference, which has certain meanings associated with it, usually negative cultural stereotypes, such as equating disability as evil. So, and something to be therefore feared and distrusted. So in the Mahabharata, you have the orthopedically impaired Shakuni. And then in the Ramayana, you have Manthara, who has a hunchback. And both are the evil, cataclysmic catalysts of the chain of events in their respective narratives. Then again, you have the Sanskrit saying which says Yatha Akriti Tatha Prakriti, which reinforces the principle that form is determined by character in evaluating disabled people. And all your other treatises, Charak Samhita, Kautilya's Arthashastra, Manusmriti, which is the basis of Indian law, all represent disabled people in a very disempowering way and have an exclusionary approach towards them. So let us now look at a few models of disability, conceptual models. Each model gives us its own explanation of what the problem is, who holds the problem, who should address the problem, and how. So this is the morality model. As you can see at the center, the problem is said to be the disabled individual. And it says that disability is caused by a moral lapse, bring shame to the individual and the family, equates disability with defective minds and bodies, terms like suffering, being a burden on society, a stigma, and the outward manifestation of inner wickedness. So these stereotypes, they pervade language, media representations, and cultural beliefs. And the problem is that it is rooted in the idea that disabled people are unhappy and crave to be normal. Now, this is known by these different names, this particular model, which are given on the slide. So it depicts disabled people as victims of circumstances who should be pitied and who are passive, unproductive, and powerless members of society. If you read the text in the circles, they are expected to adjust and to accept their situation with courage. So if you recall, all such representations from cinema, just try and recall, characters in wheelchairs, hobbling around on crutches, blind people groping around in the darkness, singing tragic songs. At other times, in this model, people with disabilities are expected to overcome their impairments by their extraordinary efforts, and be brave, inspirational, courageous. This is often called the super crip phenomenon. Now, just as the term queer has been appropriated by the LGBTQ community as a badge of pride, the term crip from cripple, which was earlier an abuse that was heaped on disabled people, has been appropriated by them in a political manner. So you are acceptable only if you overperform. You cannot simply perform. With that, we look at the next model, the medical model of disability. And this has been constructed and perpetuated by the medical fraternity, biological scientists, rehabilitators, policymakers, psychologists, and sociologists. So therefore, it has become the official and the most authoritative definition of disability. So as you can see, again, the problem is the disabled person. The focus here, again, is still on the disability, not on the person or the experience of disability. And here, impairment and disability are considered to be synonymous terms. And it treats disability as an affliction of the person's body, mind, or senses, as an abnormality, as something less than human. It is again perceived as a personal tragedy, a disaster which occurs at random to unfortunate individuals, which the disabled individual needs to come to terms with. So here the keywords are illness, suffering, coping, management strategies. And the whole idea is that the disabled body should be cured, surgically corrected, or managed according to medical and aesthetic standards in order to become whole again. Now, this representation also does not treat disability as a complex life experience. And whatever knowledge is produced about disability also tends to endorse this particular view. Now, the model, of course, this model has good intentions to eliminate disability. But what it ends up doing is that it stigmatizes disabled persons by saying that impairment or disability lies in the anatomical body. It directs disabled persons into confining social roles in which they can enter society only on the terms of the able-bodied majority. So they are perceived as passive, being acted upon, and as though they don't have the capacity to transform their lives without the help of professional bodies. So this model also continues to propagate able-bodied normalcy and promotes segregation and perpetuates stereotypes. So in this way, we see that we live in body, I'm sorry, I'm unable to go to the next slide. Yeah. So in this way, we live in, body-focused societies where the well-functioning body is upheld as the ideal and where the disabled body is termed as defective or lacking, where little consideration is given to the self-concept of the disabled person or the shaping of their identity. And this brings us to the pioneering and morally compelling social work on stigma by Irving Goffman, written in 1963. So Goffman states that this term stigma, in its original meaning from Greek, referred to marks that were inflicted on the bodies of certain individuals, usually slaves, who had transgressed the norms or values of a particular society. Now, these marks were made on the face and the hands. They were fully visible to public view. They were made as signs of social disgrace. They rendered the bearer's transgressions permanently evident and condemned the person to a life of dishonor. And Goffman used the term in a negative way to talk about any physical or social condition, attribute, or behavior which marked off the bearer symbolically as culturally inferior, making him or her feel ashamed. So this stigma theory is often applied to disability. Now, a critique of these two models, the earlier two models of morality model and the medical model, came about in the 1960s in the West in the form of this model, the social model. So you can see at the center, the problem changes. And here, disability has nothing to do with the body, but is a social construct. So basically, it raised a collective sense of injustice, termed the prejudice against disabled people as social oppression. It challenged the social productions of disability and claimed a collective identity under the banner of civil rights. So here, disability is constructed socially by a non-accommodating environment because you do not have a universal design code, you do not have an accessible built environment, you don't have usable public transport systems or inclusive education or flexible work arrangements, and because you have communication barriers, individual prejudice, institutional discrimination, society's unrealistic expectations of body norms, and so on and so forth. And all these are believed to lead to fundamental inequalities and a situation of handicap. So what is handicap? A handicap is a severely detrimental situation that isolates disabled persons from the mainstream, socially, vocationally, economically, and educationally. So you see how this model is a profound paradigm shift in the way disability is conceptualized because it is about agency and equity, rights, choice, and social change. So here disabled persons are rights holders, and it is their prerogative to advocate for the removal of institutional, physical, communicational, and attitudinal barriers in society. We also have several other positive models of disability, which I'm not going into, which affirm a non-tragic view of disability. And they actually emphasize disabled people's positive social identities, their strengths and capabilities. But in this one, an important model for designers, which is called the systems model, stakeholders, whether individuals or communities, must assume responsibility for those elements over which they can exercise some control. For example, utilizing what resources are available to them in their environment, like schools, transportation. At the same time, this model says that culture, society, and governments need to ensure that individuals get these resources and opportunities to maximize their functional capabilities within the given environment, remove barriers, and promote, different alternatives for personal actions. Now, let me quickly introduce you to this interdisciplinary field of disability studies as an academic inquiry area and as a field for political struggle. So this arose in 1960s from the pioneering work of disability activists and disabled academics and the growing politicization of disabled people around the world and their campaign for their rights and dignity. So at first, the disability studies scholars had a very clear political orientation, and they were engaged in forging a clear collective identity for the disabled. And early research was within the social sciences, but gradually it began to move beyond sociological, economic, and rights-based arguments towards mainstreaming disability as something that is representative of the human condition, meaning anybody can become disabled at any point of time, and hence to be studied. So then it entered a broad array of disciplines: literature, history, cultural studies, geography, policy studies, philosophy, and others. So under disability studies, what do? Basically, you study social meaning, symbols, and stigma that are attached to disability identity. You attack the belief that an able body and mind determine whether you are a quality human being. You assert the positive values that disabled people may contribute to society. And thus you try to reverse the negative connotations of disability and so on. So basically, that it demands a shift from the ideology of normalcy, the normal body, the normative, towards an ideology of the body as changeable and as not perfectible. And most importantly, disability studies engages with the whole concept of able-bodiedness itself as a cultural concept that needs to be critically interrogated, and which is deeply embedded in structures of power. So these are a few seminal books on disability studies. These are a few books in India. Now in India, what has happened is that especially in the last few decades, there has been a spurt of growing disability scholarship, a critical examination of the meanings of disability from the social science and humanities perspectives, but also in all the traditional disciplines, there has been gradually a filtering of disability perspectives. And also in India, what we need to remember is that the academia and activism both have gone hand in hand and also played a very significant role in shaping the two acts of 1995 and 2016. So thus in India, we see a clear link between disability studies and the disability rights movement. Okay? And this is feeding into strategies and action with both scholars and academics and activists coming together on common platforms. Now with that, we'll take a turn here and look at another kind of fact sheet. From this slide, we can see the disparity that exists between disabled men and women. And at this point, let me narrate an incident to you of the time I was working on a consultancy project on women in India for International Women's Day a few years ago. So an official from the Ministry of Women and Child Welfare visited NID, and I asked her, very casually, what kind of programs the ministry took up for disabled women. So she looked at me very quizzically at first, and then very unfazed, she said, "Are bhai, first let the ministry work for normal women. When a certain threshold is reached, we will also consider disabled women." Now this response holds multiple meanings and connotations for disabled women in India. One, it informs us that disabled women are not normal women. Two, it says that normal women's concerns are more important. Only after their ends are served can disabled women or other such not normal women can get some attention. Three, it says that disabled women are not part of the broad category of women, but some subordinate group. And four, disabled women run the risk of being considered naive if they raise such questions. Lastly, but significantly, that bureaucrats' remark reeks of ableism in its patronizing rhetoric and tone, and in its barely concealed impatience, and in the assumptions of that person of the hierarchy between disabled and non-disabled women. Now, I'm not saying that the person was insensitive, but just that she was completely clueless of her own ableist thinking. And this incident serves to highlight the lacunae that exist in policy making in this country and the fair amount of politics involved in the acts of normal ableist society. So, if disability is a social construct, then it is linked to other overlapping social constructs, right? Like gender, age, class, religion, ethnicity, sexual orientation, all of which help us to analyze diversity. When gender enters the matrix of disability, a very deep matrix of gender disability is created, and it significantly influences people's experience of a disabling society. Can anyone tell me what are the routine kind of stereotypes that are usually leveled at women? You know, we all grow up listening to these. Can anyone name
You need
some?
to be fair. You need to be fair. You need to be.
Okay. What do they say? How women are? They are
Weak,
Submissive.
okay, weak,
Docile.
submissive. Very good. What else?
docile,
Docile, difficult,
Naive, gullible.
irrational,
Gullible, I think.
gullible, hypersensitive, unassertive, dependent, emotional, undersexed, oversexed, you know, and all these stereotypes are found in cinema. For example, if you recall disabled characters also that you have seen. So what happens is that the body becomes an important marker of identity for both women and disabled people. Both these categories are reduced to some aspect of their physical presence. Now, while woman is subjected to the gaze, the male gaze, disabled people are subjected to the stare. And while the male gaze makes the normative female a sexual spectacle, the stare reduces the disabled body to a grotesque object. And it is the definitive gesture that constructs disability as an oppressive social relationship. So both women and the disabled are objectified as things to be controlled, as lacking the power to alter their lives. And both occupy a certain rung in the ladder of hierarchy, indicating social inequality. And what is this ladder of hierarchy? Now, you know, society equates human normality with male normality. So the female normality is defined on the basis of this norm. So it is a first level of deviance, the female being the other to the male. Disabled people then are constructed as the other of the other. So a disabled man would be at the third level down. And then so a disabled woman would be at the fourth level down. And so it goes on. So suppose you have a Dalit woman in a rural location in Bihar with mental illness and also a physical disability. She will be among the most disenfranchised. So it can then be safely said that men and women experience disability differently. The other thing is that disability itself is not a homogeneous phenomenon. You know, physical impairments themselves are hierarchically structured. Some categories are considered less acceptable than others. So in this way, disabled women form a heterogeneous group. And as a group, they go through many different forms of injustice that interact in complex ways with other oppressive systems. And this is what in feminist studies we call intersectionality. So there are a large number of studies, you know, about women, empirical studies about disabled girls and women in India, how they are the most marginalized in terms of different aspects of life. And besides dealing with the oppression of being a woman in a patriarchal society, they also face the oppression of being disabled in an ableist society. And much has been written about this double discrimination. And this theory itself has been critiqued by several others, other theorists. Now, despite the considerable ground that is covered by disability studies, disabled scholars, you know, mostly male, directed their energies towards primary male experiences. And they failed to account for the experiences of gendered disability, especially of disabled women. So, feminist disability studies is interested in to see how disability intersects with other forms of oppression like gender and race and so on. And this led to the emergence and growth of feminist disability studies, which challenges both feminist studies and disability studies and reimagines both disability and gender. Importantly, they critiqued that disability, you know, is not considered as a heterogeneous phenomenon with people having differences and multiple identities. Women's experiences are rendered invisible, and it tends to speak for all disabled people. So in a nation such as India, it might negate conditions like religion, caste, tribal identities, urban, rural location, and so on. So these feminists had earlier supported the social model, but they found it problematic that this model focuses only on structural barriers and focused on employment and housing and such issues, but did not look at complex layers of the picture. And it pushed aside impairment to the private domain. So disabled feminists came up and said, look, this model makes it hard for us to talk about the difficulty, the pain, the fatigue and discomfort that arises from impairment itself, or talking about our experiences of exclusion or discrimination. And so they said all these issues need to be included in the social model. So feminist disability discourse has very strong narratives of personal growth, struggle and pain of the experience. And in India also, we have had a growing corpus of literature with feminist disability studies also focusing on the ethics of care and the relation between women with disabilities and their female caregivers. Usually in our context could be the mother or a sister, which means they are non-disabled people who nonetheless live with disability. So now, the medical, the social, and the systems model all take action in different ways. Now, because the medical model considers disability as an individual pathological problem, it looks for ways to restore the person's functional ability, largely through assistive aids and appliances, prostheses, orthoses, and so on. The social model, which places the responsibility of disability on society and the environment, urges using products, facilities, and services based on accessible design principles to reduce or remove these accessibility barriers. And the systems model promotes both accessible design and universal design as a way to increase accessibility for everyone. And considering the sweep of global markets and a booming consumer base, it demands of all segments of the economy to deliver more accessible products. And this model is also less stigmatizing than other approaches, which still continue to segregate the disabled in one or the other way. So, however, and this is the first problem here, that participation in social life, uska kya? It is a basic human right for disabled people. So how do you account for the debilitating effects of social stigma on their self-image? Now, these are the different ways in which design engages with disability. And over the course of time at NID, some of the key things that I have observed with respect to design education and disability are these, that the focus is on the medical model. There's very little consultation. The voices of actually the disabled is much lesser. And, the heterogeneity of the disabled population is also such actually that it is difficult to design for disability, because suppose you are designing for people who have an amputated arm. Now, even for two different individuals, the issues and challenges may be different. So, and these observations are based on reading graduation project documents, about 50 of them, from guiding students in their design projects and graduation projects, and interacting with other students. Then anthropometry is also a very big problem, because it is offered as a standard tool. You have certain bodily dimensions that are projected as the normal or the normative. And so that also feeds into stereotypes. Assistive design is the focus in industrial design. So I always say that don't just design the next best wheelchair and crutch. Try to look at what else can be done by way of integration of other approaches into design. Then again, many a times you find that the user has completely disappeared in the entire process. The approach is very, very designerly. So you're not looking at research or analysis, but you're looking at a problem and a solution to that. Or you are looking at applying technology in a better way, but you may not actually look at a proper spatial analysis. Or gender differences may be considered only through anthropometric data in the ergonomic study. What happens to understanding the lived experiences or the phenomenological aspects of disability? Then again, academic departments and design disciplines usually have very good intentions, but they remain watertight compartments. So those insights that can result from a truly inter and multidisciplinary interaction is lost out. So when we talk about design for disability, the dominant culture is typically of problem solving, and these are some of the different kinds of people who may be involved in this uh, sector or this domain. So with that, we come to adaptable design. As the name itself suggests, you make adjustments or modifications to an existing design. For example, you may make a ramp to a building, where there are no ramps for wheelchair access. And this is also called low barrier. So uh, they're very simple, clever, practical solutions, even if the issue cannot be entirely addressed. And laws do not make it mandatory usually. Then, so this is an example of adaptable design. When we talk about assistive design, it mainly specializes in prosthesis and orthotics, artificial limbs and braces, but even digital sound synthesizers for the blind or reading machines that transform printed words to speech can be included in this category. So what are these products? They are used to increase, maintain, or improve the functional capabilities of disabled individuals. Now, small wonder then that design practice, which is a direct outcome of design education, primarily considers designing for the disabled as inappropriately so, as for special needs, design for special needs, rather than lifestyle aspirations. And the criticism that is often leveled against these products is that they are not affordable in a country like India, for example. And also because turnover and profitability in the market are very low, the investment in design itself is poor. So you have a whole lot of stigmatizing aids and appliances out there in the market. Then again, the other criticism that is leveled is that designers sometimes use cost as an excuse from doing design innovation. Okay. Now this, despite the fact that there exists a set of universal design principles in India, which emphasizes on affordability as an important aspect of design. Then again, the focus of design for disability has been on the clinical aspects of disability, and rather than cultural or even bodily differences. Then there are certain cultural telling things in culture. For example, prosthesis makers often observe that women in India do not like using prosthetic hands because they are heavy, or that young girls in India do not like the sort of wheelchairs that are available because they find them hard to maneuver, they are bulky. So if design for disability becomes design for everybody all the time, then in the end it will be reduced to design for nobody. And so it is important that disabled people should be consulted in the design process. Another very important point that I would like to make is about the relationship between the use of prosthesis by disabled people and their body image. Because the normative assistive design product is typically very ugly, bad, doesn't have visual appeal. It is in very typical beige and pink kind of colors, and seems to have been developed with no thought of whether someone would actually want to use these or be seen using them. And Professor Balram, who was from the first batch of product design at NID, and my colleague here who retired many years ago, he says that such products send out signals of pity or compromise in form, color, and style. And then users feel that this becomes a marker of my disability, so they lose respect for their own body and they internalize the negative images that are thrown their way. So therefore they prefer not to use these. And then the last point on this slide that I would like to make is that we often find that the time that should have been devoted to improving accessibility or usability or aesthetics is spent on technical development. So that again becomes a restriction. And that there is an oversight in mainstream design about psychological and emotional factors which underlie design and design products, which also influence purchasing decisions. So this leads to further marginalization of disabled people because we fail to recognize their market potential as consumers and their aspiration to be treated as part of the mainstream. Now, with accessible design, what happens is that, even though all barriers have been removed and access is allowed, the design is only geared towards a specific bunch of people, which is people with disabilities. When we look at Apple and Microsoft, both provide, you all use smartphones, and both Apple and Microsoft provide accessibility features in their respective operating systems. What happened was that designers from both these organizations many years ago worked with representatives from the disabled community to create designs that truly addressed real needs within that community. And it is their first-hand experience that led to intuition, which was based on personal experience. So you had better kind of products. And from a social theory perspective, this enables a shift from the uh, a shift towards the social model of disability, away from the medical model. It enables the stigma of disability to be dismissed because you see disabled people acquiring education, working, commuting, marrying, running households, having children, having a social and community life, and carrying out their daily lives in a dignified manner. That's what accessible design does. Inclusive design, as it is called in Europe and Japan, and universal design in the United States, seeks to make mainstream design accessible to everyone. And the challenge here with this design is to match the product or environment to its users, each with their individual needs. And to do this, a designer must choose what must be included and what must be excluded for each particular design. Okay. So it is much more progressive in spirit as we can understand. It places people at the heart of the design process. It acknowledges diversity and everything that I've been talking about in this session earlier. And basically, it provides buildings and environments that can be used by all. So this is how, general design, universal design, accessible and adaptable design would interact if you were to make a Venn diagram of this. Now, universal design, we all know what it means. With products, systems, and environments which are usable by people with the widest range of abilities and without the need for adaptation. So also UD, as we call it, it broadens the understanding of accessibility. Accessibility does not mean that you give wheelchair access and so on, but the design of services also, and the way people of all ages and abilities interact with them. So these basically, these are the sort of people, elderly, it will benefit a pregnant woman, it will benefit a child, a disabled person, all. And the 7 principles of universal design are also familiar to all of us, that it should be equitous, it should be flexible, simple and intuitive. The information should be very easily perceptible. There should be a margin for error, low physical effort, and also size and space for approach and use. So IT and telecommunications are 2 industries where universal design has made significant inroads and has brought about equality in many ways. Take ATMs, which meet many accessibility requirements today, including certain simplified and standardized protocols. Computers and the internet also support independent living. Most computers now, which we all use, have pre-installed accessibility software that benefits individuals with visual impairments and hearing loss. Screen magnifiers, screen reading software, speech recognition software, all of this and text communication software are the norm now on any computer or smartphone. So these features provide aids, not just for a specific demographic, but also for the elderly, for example. And thus they benefit a wider audience. Then again, most computers and smartphones have, and these are rapidly flooding the markets with the sort of features that they have. Inbuilt intelligence and embedded sensors are also newer opportunities to develop a new generation of UD products. So today's smartphones are like the 21st century Swiss Army knife with a range of features and are having a very transformative effect on both society and culture. Now, in catering to the needs of different user groups within one system, you are inclusive and socially conscientious in your approach, design process, and outcomes. So to a large degree, you are able to make differences in terms of abilities unnoticeable. And this is a significant transcendence over even accessible design, because even accessible design manages to draw attention to difference. Now, such a philosophy of design would almost certainly lead to good design, because you are as if disembodying the body, so that it can be anybody's body that is being designed for. A short-statured body, an aging body, an obese body could help substantially raise self-esteem and erase the marker of disability as something different. So these are just different strategies, not for today's, So basically what is required is a cultural re-symbolization in terms of looking at disability itself. And, basically designers need to seek knowledge from research fields of other domains like health and wellness, social participation, human psychology, performance, and so on, if one has to do this kind of re-symbolization. So these are some of my recommendations, how you can move from a body-centric approach to a human-centric approach, study systems at large, and place the disabled individual within the larger scheme of systems design, engage with service design. But products such as the ones mentioned earlier are very expensive and hence unaffordable. And we know what happens in South Asia, in India, for example. So the matrix of UD is rendered more complex because we have other realities like poverty, literacy, and overpopulation thrown in. And also our population is so diverse that, that it precludes any kind of proper design intervention. However, the last two things that I would say, one is that concurrently with public health activities and initiatives, you also need political lobbying, advocacy, and self-assertion by disabled associations and NGOs for greater commitment and for sensitization of people in design and architecture, education, and practice. Otherwise, it will not work. So, and finally, these are the sort of ethical questions that need to be raised, which throw up varied concerns. Why is a certain disability-related initiative being undertaken? What responsibilities arise, from the very fact that I am a designer? Whose perspectives am I including? Whose perspectives am I leaving out? How can I, use my knowledge and skills to challenge oppression? Is my design reproducing the status quo or changing it? And most importantly, how am I representing the disabled person through my work? So, this is a very self-explanatory diagram, infographic that just tells us what is the difference between, because I'm often asked these, that what is the difference between exclusion and segregation, integration and inclusion? So you can see here, they are out. Here, you do provide them education, employment in a separate kind of environment, but you do not really bring them into this majority fold. In this one, you do bring them in, but you say, bhai, it is your responsibility to fit in. But true inclusion means systemic reform at all levels. Yeah. And as I like to say that when you design for disability, you actually end up designing for a whole lot of other people also. And hence it is important. Its importance cannot be underscored.
Thank you very much for such a thoughtful and such a compassionate talk on a sensitive topic like this. And thank you for sensitizing the budding designers of IIT Hyderabad about this sensitive subject of disability and how design can work for the betterment of lives for people with disability. It was such a sublime and an in-depth insight on the subject, and it was our privilege today to have you, and we are really fortunate to have you today. Thank you so much again.
Thank you, Ankita, and actually thanks to you for inviting me in the first place. But I do hope that the students in their future work will keep these things not just from a disability perspective, but from a perspective that how can we include the broadest kind of population and cater to the broadest kind of population in the work that we do.